but the older he became, the more he questioned the very idea of tradition. He didn't want to be loved for his title, but for the man he was. But was that possible? Determined to find his true love and escape the pressure of the palace, Obadalia hatched a plan. He would leave Zudora in secret, dressing as a commoner to live among the people. He hoped to find someone who could see past the crown and love him for himself. As night fell, he quietly packed a bag with just enough food and supplies to get by. His heart raced as he snuck out of the palace, avoiding the royal guards. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in his life, he felt a spark of hope. Days of travel brought Obadalia to Ologun, a modest village nestled on the outskirts of Zudora. He quietly packed a bag with just enough food and supplies, and the scent of earth and firewood filled the air. His heart raced as he snuck out of the palace, it was nothing like avoiding the royal guards. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in his life, he felt a spark of hope. Sat alone on the grand balcony of Obadalia, gazing out a modest village nestled on the outskirts of Zudora. He quietly packed a bag with just enough food and supplies, and the scent of earth and firewood. His heart raced as he snuck out of the palace, gazing out over the royal Zudora's kingdom. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in his life, he had been born to rule, yet there was a days of travel brought Obadalia to gazing out a modest village, and as night fell, he quietly packed a bag with just enough food and supplies. King had sat alone and firewood. His heart raced as he snuck out of the palace, gazing out avoiding the royal pushing for Obadalia. The journey ahead was his 25th birthday, first time in his life. He had been born to rule, yet there was a days of travel brought Obadalia, gazing out a modest village, and as night fell, he quietly packed a bag with just rose his father and king had sat alone and firewood. His heart raced as he snuck out of the gazing out avoiding the royal pushing for Obadalia. The journey ahead was his 25th birthday. His father's in the future he married. He had been born to rule, yet there was days of travel brought Obadalia, gazing out a modest village, and as night fell, he didn't want to be loved. Just rose his father and king had sat alone and firewood. His heart raced as he snuck out of the gazing out avoiding the royal pushing for Obadalia. The journey was his father's in the future he would leave Zudora in secret, dressing as a commoner to live among the people. He hoped gazing out a modest village, as night fell, he didn't want to be loved. Just rose his father and king had sat alone and firewood. His heart raced as he snuck out of gazing out avoiding his heart raced as he snuck out of the journey was his father's in the journey ahead. He would leave Zudora in secret, but for the first time dressing as a commoner to live among the people. He gazing out a modest village, as night fell, he didn't want to be just rose his father and king had sat alone and firewood. His heart raced as he snuck out of gazing out avoiding his heart raced. It was nothing like the grandeur of Zudora. Here, the people worked hard, their lives shaped by sweat and struggle. Yet there was a beauty to it, a raw, unrefined strength he had never known in his palace. His stomach growled in hunger, and he approached a woman selling roasted yams by the side of the road. "I have no money," he said, feeling the pang of embarrassment, "but I am willing to work for food." The woman, Mama Busy, studied him for a moment. His torn clothes and thin frame suggested a man who had seen hardship. Without a word, she handed him a warm yam. "Eat first. You will work later," she said kindly. Obadalia, overwhelmed by her generosity, sat on the ground and devoured the yam. It was a simple meal, but it tasted like freedom. For the first time in his life, Obadalia was forced to work with his hands. He carried water from the stream, chopped firewood, and helped tend the fields. His body, unused to such labor, ached with every movement, but he did not complain. The work grounded him in a way that the opulence of his palace never had. It was in this humble village that he met Ayomide. She was everything he admired: intelligent, strong, and compassionate. Her laughter was like music, and her eyes sparkled with a quiet wisdom. She saw through his disguise, recognizing that there was more to him than the rough clothes he wore. He had no words to explain why he was there, but she didn't need them. It was enough to know that they shared a deep connection, one that could not be bought. As days turned into weeks, Obadalia and Ayomide grew closer. They spent long hours talking and working side by side. Ayomide had no interest in the trappings of nobility. She sought a man who was kind and true. Obadalia admired her strength, her ability to see beyond the surface of things. Still, he kept his true identity hidden. If she knew he was a prince, would she still love him? Would the weight of his title come between them? His fear of rejection gnawed at him. However, not everyone in Ologun was pleased with Obadalia's presence. Kola, the chief's son, had taken an interest in Ayomide and saw the newcomer as a threat to his claim on her affection. Jealous and enraged, Kola began spreading rumors about Obadalia, accusing him of being a thief. "Beware of the stranger," Kola told the villagers. "He hides his true nature behind the rags he wears." One night, Kola accused Obadalia of stealing from the chief's storeroom. A crowd gathered as Kola shouted, "If you are innocent, prove it. Show us who you really are." Obadalia, with his heart racing, stood before the villagers. Their eyes, once filled with acceptance, now held suspicion. Ayomide stepped forward. "I have worked beside this man every day. He has done nothing but labor honestly. I believe him." Just as tensions reached their peak, Baba Kunal, an elder in the village, approached Obadalia. He studied him for a moment before speaking softly, "I know who you are, my prince." In an instant, Obadalia's secret was out. The villagers stared in disbelief as the truth spread like wildfire. Obadalia, the stranger they had come to respect, was the crown prince of Zudora. Kola's eyes blazed with fury, and Ayomide felt a sting of betrayal. "You lied to me," she whispered, her voice filled with hurt. Before Obadalia could explain, royal guards arrived, sent by his father to bring him home. Ayomide turned away, her heart broken, unable to look at him. Back at the palace, the king was furious. "You have disgraced this family, Obadalia." King Adagba thundered. "You will marry a noblewoman as tradition dictates." But Obadalia refused. His heart belonged to Ayomide, not some noblewoman chosen for political reasons. Meanwhile, Kola was not done. His jealousy festered, and with the help of his allies in the council, he began plotting to overthrow the king and take the throne for himself. The elders, fearing the unrest caused by Obadalia's actions, devised a test. Ayomide would have to prove her worthiness through a series of trials, tests of intelligence, moral integrity, and endurance. They believed that if she could withstand the trials, she might be worthy of Obadalia's love and the throne. The trials were grueling, and many noblewomen mocked Ayomide, believing she would fail. But Ayomide faced them all with dignity, pushing through each challenge with grace and wisdom. She knew that she had to prove not only her worth as Obadalia's love but as a future queen of Zudora. As Ayomide persevered through the trials, Kola and his conspirators struck. One night, they launched a coup, and the palace descended into chaos. Warriors loyal to the traitors clashed with royal guards. Obadalia, desperate to protect his family and his kingdom, fought with all his might, but the traitors were relentless. Ayomide, always resourceful, helped turn the tide. Her knowledge of the palace and its defenses gave Obadalia and his forces the advantage. Kola's plans crumbled, and he was exposed as the true villain. After the dust settled, the council finally acknowledged Ayomide's worth. The trials had been tough, but she had not only passed them but had proven herself in battle. King Adagba, though still resistant, relented. "A woman who fights for love and kingdom is worthy to be queen," he grudgingly declared. And so, Obadalia and Ayomide were united in marriage. Their love story became a legend in Zudora, a tale of resilience, love, and sacrifice. The wedding of Obadalia and Ayomide was a grand affair, attended by dignitaries from across the kingdom and beyond. It was a symbol of the unity between the royal family and the people, a message of hope after the tumult of recent events. Despite the tension in the air, Obadalia couldn't help but feel the weight of the crown lessening as he looked into Ayomide's eyes. They had fought together, survived together, and now, together, they would rule. As the ceremony concluded, the people cheered, but Obadalia's heart still carried the burden of his kingdom's unrest. His father had, for the moment, accepted Ayomide as his daughter-in-law, but the council was divided. Some feared the influence of someone like Ayomide, a woman of the people, on the royal throne. "Can we truly trust her?" one elder had asked during the council meeting. "She has proven herself," the royal advisor had argued. "Not only in trials of intellect and strength but in battle." But the division remained. Some factions within the council feared the changes Obadalia and Ayomide represented, a future where the power of the monarchy would be shared, where the voices of the common people would be heard as much as the nobles. Obadalia knew that change could be a double-edged sword. How could he protect his people, his beloved Ayomide, and the throne, without falling into the same traps of tyranny his father had fallen into? The early days of their marriage were filled with both joy and tension. Obadalia, learning to balance his role as king with his deep love for Ayomide, found the court to be a constant reminder of the challenges ahead. Ayomide, though beloved by the common folk, faced skepticism from the court's elite. At a grand banquet, an elder noblewoman named Lady Bemisola, known for her conservative views, openly questioned Ayomide's wisdom. "Tell me, Your Majesty," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "how do you expect to rule a kingdom when you have no experience in courtly matters?" Ayomide, ever composed, smiled gracefully. "I may not have been raised in the courts of Zudora, but I have been raised by its people. They are the heartbeat of this kingdom, and I will not ignore them as my predecessors have." The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling on the air. While some nobles fumed, others, including a few influential leaders from across the kingdom, nodded in agreement. Obadalia, sitting beside Ayomide, felt a swell of pride. But even as he celebrated her strength, he knew the tension would only grow. Change, no matter how necessary, was rarely accepted without resistance. As time passed, Obadalia and Ayomide worked together to implement reforms across the kingdom. They ensured that the voices of farmers, traders, and artisans were heard at the council. They initiated policies to improve the education of women and children, expanded access to health care, and fostered diplomatic relations with neighboring kingdoms. But their efforts were not without resistance. Those who had once profited from the old ways whispered of rebellion. The balance of power within the court was fragile, and Ayomide's popularity among the people only served to fuel the ambitions of those who sought to control her and her husband. One fateful evening, as Obadalia and Ayomide sat in the royal study, a shadowy figure appeared at the door. It was the royal advisor, a man who had long been a supporter of the traditional order, yet one who had proven himself trustworthy. But tonight, there was something different in his eyes. "Your Majesties," he said, bowing deeply, "there is something you must know. There are whispers of a rebellion brewing in the eastern provinces. Some of the nobles, dissatisfied with the changes you have brought, have begun plotting in secret." Obadalia's face darkened. He had always feared that the kingdom's path to peace would be marred by betrayal. His father's reign had been marked by a heavy hand, and Obadalia was determined to break that cycle, but the price of peace seemed ever so high. "We must act quickly," Ayomide said, her voice steady. "If we let this rebellion grow, it will destroy everything we've worked for." Obadalia nodded. "We'll take the necessary steps, but we will not rule with fear, Ayomide. The people are watching us, and we must show them the strength of justice, not tyranny." The rebellion, fueled by a mix of nobility and disgruntled military commanders, had begun to take root in the eastern provinces. Rumors of armed uprisings and skirmishes began to filter into the capital. The time had come for Obadalia and Ayomide to face the forces threatening the stability of their kingdom. The couple traveled to the heart of the rebellion, a journey that took them across treacherous lands where loyalties shifted like the desert sands. The closer they came to the rebel stronghold, the more intense the atmosphere became. Obadalia's heart raced, his mind torn between the love for his people and the weight of the crown. "Do you think we can truly change the kingdom, Obadalia?" Ayomide asked softly one night as they camped beneath a blanket of stars. "I believe we must try," Obadalia replied, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "But I fear the price will be high." When they finally reached the rebel encampment, they were met with a cold reception. The leader of the rebellion was none other than Lord Emeka, a former general who had served under King Adagba. He had once been a trusted advisor, but his ambitions and frustrations had led him down a darker path. "So, the crown prince and his commoner queen have come to face me," Lord Emeka sneered, his voice laced with venom. "You think your reforms will save this kingdom? You are weak, and your people will suffer for it." Obadalia's heart pounded, but he stood tall. "I don't come to fight you, Emeka. I come to ask for your loyalty. We can rebuild this kingdom, but we must do it together. Violence will only tear us apart." Lord Emeka laughed bitterly. "Your words are naive, Prince. Your people will never bow to a woman like her. They want strength, not your compassion." Ayomide stepped forward, her presence commanding. "You underestimate the strength of the people, Emeka. They are not loyal to power alone, they are loyal to what is just. And justice will always rise above tyranny." The rebellion reached its peak in a violent confrontation. The clash between the royal forces and the rebels was fierce, and lives were lost on both sides. But despite the odds, Obadalia and Ayomide's strength as a united front proved too much for the rebels to overcome. Their vision of a kingdom ruled by compassion and fairness began to take root. In the aftermath of the battle, Lord Emeka was captured, and the remaining rebels were offered a chance for reconciliation. With Ayomide's guidance, the kingdom began to heal, slowly but surely. As peace returned to the kingdom, Obadalia and Ayomide stood together on the balcony of the royal palace, looking out over the land they had fought for. The once divided kingdom of Zudora was now united under a vision of fairness and compassion, where the people were heard and the rulers served with honor. "We've done it," Obadalia said, his voice filled with pride. "We've rebuilt the kingdom, Ayomide." She smiled, her eyes gleaming with love and wisdom. "No, my love, we have only just begun. Our work is never done. But together, we will always face whatever comes." And so, the kingdom of Zudora entered a new era, where justice and love led the way. Months had passed since the rebellion's defeat, and the kingdom of Zudora was slowly recovering. Obadalia and Ayomide had put in place reforms to rebuild the economy and heal the fractured society. However, beneath the surface, tensions still lingered. Not everyone was pleased with the changes they had ushered in. Some of the old guard, those who had been loyal to King Adagba's reign, still held sway over key parts of the kingdom's structure. It was not enough for Obadalia and Ayomide to merely maintain peace, they had to ensure that the old system of oppression and favoritism did not re-emerge. One day, Ayomide sat with the royal council in their grand chamber, listening to the arguments of the nobles and advisors. Some argued that the reforms had gone too far, while others pushed for more radical change. The voices of the common folk had become louder, but their demands had become increasingly complicated, with some calling for more autonomy and others for more direct support from the monarchy. "We cannot ignore the voices of the people," Ayomide said, her tone resolute. "We must continue to build a system where the kingdom is not just ruled by a select few but guided by the wisdom of the many." Obadalia, though equally committed to his people, found himself conflicted. He knew the nobility's power and influence couldn't be easily undone, but the desire for long-term justice ran deep within him. "I agree with you, Ayomide," he replied, his gaze distant as he thought of the path ahead. "But we must tread carefully. The balance of power is delicate, and we cannot afford to alienate those who have helped us rebuild." Ayomide turned to him, her hand gently resting on his. We are not here to please the powerful, my love. We are here to serve the people. And in time, those who seek to hold on to power will come to understand that justice will never be silenced. The pressure on Obadalia and Ayomide's reign began to mount. With the unrest from the previous rebellion still fresh in the minds of the people, even the smallest misstep could spark another uprising. The royal court, though united on the surface, was rife with hidden agendas. Some nobles, desperate to regain the power they had lost, quietly rallied support from disgruntled factions. One evening, after a tense council meeting, Obadalia sat alone in the palace gardens, contemplating the weight of his responsibilities. The palace, with its towering spires and lush greenery, felt both like a sanctuary and a prison. Ayomide joined him, her presence calming as always. She sat beside him, leaning her head against his shoulder. "It's difficult," Obadalia murmured, "not to feel the weight of the crown, of the kingdom's future. The people expect so much from us, and every decision seems like it carries the risk of everything we've built falling apart." Ayomide smiled gently. "I understand, my love. But remember that leadership is not about perfection. It's about the courage to do what is right, even when it's hard. We've already shown the kingdom what true leadership looks like. The path may not be easy, but we will walk it together." As Obadalia and Ayomide faced their internal struggles, new challenges began to arise from the outside world. A neighboring kingdom, once a friendly ally, began to show signs of aggression. Its king, eager to expand his empire, saw the success of Zudora's reforms as a threat to his own rule. Whispers of a potential invasion began to spread like wildfire. Obadalia was forced to balance diplomacy with military preparedness, a task that filled him with unease. He didn't want to wage war, but he knew that to protect the kingdom and its people, he might have no choice. "We cannot afford to look weak," Obadalia said, pacing back and forth in their war room. "If we do, they will come for us, just as the rebels did." Ayomide stood by his side, her eyes focused, her mind working. "But we cannot let war define us, Obadalia. Our kingdom is built on justice and peace. We must try every possible avenue for diplomacy first." Together, they sent emissaries to the neighboring kingdom, attempting to negotiate peace, but the king was resolute in his desire for expansion. The situation grew more tense by the day. One fateful morning, the worst fears of the royal family came true. The neighboring kingdom had crossed the border, sending its armies into the western plains of Zudora. It was an act of aggression that could not be ignored. As the war drums began to beat, Obadalia's heart broke. He had never wanted war, but now it seemed inevitable. He stood before his generals and the royal council, preparing for the worst. "We will defend our kingdom," Obadalia declared, his voice steady, though his heart was heavy. "But we will not do so out of hatred or vengeance. Our army will fight with honor. And we will show our enemies that Zudora will never fall." Ayomide joined him on the battlefield, though her role was not that of a warrior. She would be the voice of reason and compassion, helping to rally the people and ensure that their spirits remained unbroken. The war that followed was brutal and unforgiving, stretching across the plains and into the mountains. But through their unity, Zudora's people held their ground. The battle for their kingdom became a symbol of resistance, not just against a foreign king, but against the forces that would seek to undo the progress they had fought for. In the midst of battle, Obadalia faced his greatest challenge yet. As the conflict raged on, he was forced into a personal confrontation with the enemy king, who sought to break him mentally and emotionally. The king mocked Obadalia's reforms, calling them foolish and weak. "Your people will never accept a woman on the throne," the king sneered, "and you are too soft to rule." But Obadalia, with Ayomide's strength in his heart, responded with defiance. "You do not understand the heart of my kingdom, nor the strength of its people. Zudora is not about one man or one woman, it is about the unity of all." As the battle reached its peak, Obadalia and Ayomide's forces turned the tide. The enemy was defeated, and the invaders withdrew, unwilling to face the unyielding spirit of Zudora. The war had ended, and peace had returned once more to Zudora. In the aftermath, Obadalia and Ayomide stood together once again, looking over their kingdom. The wounds of war would take time to heal, but they were determined to continue their work. "It feels like we've fought for this kingdom all over again," Obadalia said, his voice filled with both relief and sadness. Ayomide nodded, her hand clasping his. "And we will continue to fight, for the people, for the future, for love." Together, they had not only rebuilt Zudora once but had defended it with the very essence of what had made their reign so different: love, justice, and unity. And they knew that their work was far from over. As tensions with the neighboring kingdom reached their peak, Obadalia's leadership was under intense pressure. He had long known that diplomacy was Zudora's best option, but his generals, especially the formidable General Ayomide, were urging him to take immediate military action. A distant border skirmish had become an all-consuming threat to Zudora's security. The council had gathered in the grand hall of the palace. The nobles and military leaders exchanged heated words, with Ayomide pushing for a preemptive strike. Obadalia had hoped to avoid war, but the situation was becoming increasingly dire. "This cannot go on much longer," General Ayomide said, his voice firm. "They are testing our resolve. We cannot show weakness." Ayomide stood beside her husband, her hand gently resting on his arm. She spoke softly, "We cannot let fear drive us to war. If we act too quickly, we risk everything we've worked for." Obadalia's mind raced, torn between the advice of his generals and his wife's counsel. He knew war was imminent if they didn't act quickly. Still, part of him longed to avoid a conflict that would cost countless lives. "We will prepare," he finally said. "But we will not be the aggressors. If they come for us, we will defend Zudora." The council seemed to agree, and Obadalia issued orders to fortify the borders, though a part of him felt uneasy about what the coming days might bring. The weeks that followed were a blur of strategic planning and military readiness. The neighboring kingdom had amassed its forces at the border, and the war drum began to sound. Zudora's army, led by General Ayomide, held firm, but the atmosphere was thick with the anticipation of battle. Obadalia spent sleepless nights debating whether the kingdom's future would be defined by bloodshed. When the first strike came, it was sudden, but not unexpected. Zudora's forces quickly met the invaders at the border in a fierce confrontation. Ayomide, though not a warrior, had insisted on accompanying Obadalia to the battlefield, offering her counsel and aiding in the organization of their medical teams. She knew the price of war too well and couldn't bear the thought of being left behind. The battle raged for hours, and as Zudora's forces finally turned the tide in their favor, Obadalia watched with a heavy heart. He'd never imagined leading his kingdom into war, but the circumstances had left him no choice. When the fighting subsided, both sides were left with heavy losses. Zudora had won, but the victory was hollow. As Obadalia and Ayomide surveyed the battlefield, the weight of the lives lost hung heavy in the air. "This is not victory," Obadalia said quietly, staring at the wounded and dead. "This is a tragedy." Ayomide's voice lives. "We will rebuild." Despite the heavy toll, the neighboring kingdom's forces withdrew, nursing their own wounds. However, the peace that had been won came at a tremendous cost. "This is a tragedy." Conquest. They whispered that the prince was weak, unwilling to assert his power as king. "We will rebuild." On the other side, Ayomide supporters saw her the neighboring kingdom's forces withdrew, her actions during the war, providing care
However,
to the wounded and
organizing
organizing
wounded
came
and
at
dead
tremendous
had
cost.
solidified
This
her
is a
role as
tragedy,
not
not just a
quest.
queen by title.
They whispered
but as
that
a
the prince was
leader
weak
in her
unwilling
own
to
to
assert his power as
Yet,
king.
the nobles,
We will rebuild. On the other side, more
Ayomide
the heavy toll,
saw her
still viewed her
with
with
disdain
disdain for her
withdrew.
humble
Her
actions
actions
during the war. The dividing care between these factions had been one came at tremendous cost.
Solidified
This
her
is a
role as
tragedy.
not just a
became a
queen by
battlefield.
title,
They
but
whispered
as
that
a
the prince was weak.
the
The
whispers
whispers
of
of
Ayomide
voice
voiced
grew
his
louder.
power
Yet
as king.
the
The
nobles
nobles
will
found
rebuild.
themselves
On the other
in
side,
possible
more
positions
the
of
heavy
fortitude
love for
saw her
still
Ayomide
viewed her
with
with
disdain
disdain
for
for
her
his
humble
leadership
actions
during
during
the
the
war.
war.
The dividing care, however,
and
the council convened once more.
solidified
This is a tragic
discussion
became a battlefield. They whispered that the prince was weak. The whispers of Ayomide voiced his power. Yet the nobles found themselves on the other side. Ayomide heavy love no still viewed her with disdain for her humble actions is not a democracy. The dividing care, however, is a monarchy. The council convened the prince must solidify. This is a tragic discussion became a battlefield. They whispered that the prince was weak. The whispers of Ayomide voiced his power. Yet the nobles found themselves on the other side. Ayomide heavy love still viewed her with disdain for her voice. This action is not a democracy. The strength of a king, however, is a monarchy. The council convened the prince must solidify. This is a tragic discussion became a battlefield. They whispered that the prince was weak. The whispers of Ayomide voiced his power. Yet the nobles found themselves on the other side. Ayomide heavy love still viewed her with disdain. But there was this action is not a democracy. The strength of a king, however, is a monarchy. The council convened the prince must solidify. This is a tragic discussion became a battlefield. They whispered that the prince was weak. The whiskey Ayomide voiced his power. Yet the nobles found themselves on the other side. Ayomide heavy love still viewed her with disdain. But there was this action is not a democracy. The strength of a king, however, is a monarchy. The council convened the prince must solidify. This is a tragic discussion became a battlefield. They whispered that the prince was weak. The whiskey Ayomide voiced his power. Yet the nobles found themselves on the other side. Ayomide heavy love still viewed her with disdain. But there was this action is not a democracy. The strength of a king, however, is a monarchy. The council convened the prince must solidify. This is a tragic discussion became a battlefield. They whispered that the prince was weak. The whiskey Ayomide voiced his power. Yet the nobles found themselves on the other side. Ayomide heavy love still viewed her with disdain. But there was this action is not a democracy. The strength of a king, however, is a monarchy. The council convened the prince must solidify. This is a tragic discussion became a battlefield. They whispered that the prince was weak. The whiskey Ayomide voiced his power. Yet the nobles found themselves on the other side. Ayomide heavy love still viewed her with disdain. But there was this action is not a democracy. The strength of a king, however, is a monarchy. The council convened the prince must solidify. This is a tragic discussion became a battlefield. They whispered that the prince was weak. The whiskey Ayomide voiced his power. Yet the nobles found themselves on the other side. Ayomide heavy love still viewed her with disdain. But there was this action is not a democracy. The strength of a king, however, is a monarchy. The council convened the prince must solidify. This is a tragic discussion became a battlefield. They whispered that the prince was weak. The whiskey Ayomide voiced his power. Yet the nobles found themselves on the other side. Ayomide heavy love still viewed her with disdain. But there was this action is not a democracy. The strength of a king, however, is a monarchy. The council convened the prince must solidify. This is a tragic discussion became a battlefield. They whispered that the prince was weak. The whiskey Ayomide voiced his power. Yet the nobles found themselves on the other side. Ayomide heavy love still viewed her with disdain. But there was this action is not a democracy. The strength of a king, however, is a monarchy. The council convened the prince must solidify. This is a tragic discussion became a battlefield. They whispered that the prince was weak. The whiskey Ayomide voiced his power. Yet the nobles found themselves on the other side. Ayomide heavy love still viewed her with disdain. But there was this action is not a democracy. The strength of a king, however, is a monarchy. The council convened the prince must solidify. This is a tragic discussion became a battlefield. They whispered that the prince was weak. The whiskey Ayomide voiced his power. Yet the nobles found themselves on the other side. Ayomide heavy love still viewed her with disdain. But there was this action is not a democracy. The strength of a king, however, is a monarchy. The council convened the prince must solidify. This is a tragic discussion became a battlefield. They whispered that the prince was weak. The whiskey Ayomide voiced his power. Yet the nobles found themselves on the other side. Ayomide heavy love still viewed her with disdain. But there was this action is not a democracy. The strength of a king, however, is a monarchy. The council convened the prince must solidify. This is a tragic discussion became a battlefield. They whispered that the prince was weak. The whiskey Ayomide voiced his power. Yet the nobles found themselves on the other side. Ayomide heavy love still viewed her with disdain. But there was this action is not a democracy. The strength of a king, however, is a monarchy. The council convened the
People, as they rallied behind their king and queen. The battlefield was set. Zudora's soldiers stood ready at the borders, their armor gleaming under the waning sun. Obadalia, though resolute, could not shake the feeling of unease gnawing at him. He had always known that his kingdom would face challenges, but the threat from Araba felt more dangerous than any war they had fought before. The kingdom of Araba was vast, and its king, Adaba, was known for his cunning and ruthless nature. Ayomide, now deeply involved in the kingdom's politics, stood at his side, her calm presence a source of strength. "This will not be an easy fight," she said softly. "But I have faith in you, my love. Zudora has always been strongest when united." Obadalia turned to look at her, his heart filled with gratitude. "I will do whatever it takes to protect our people." In the days that followed, Obadalia gathered his generals and devised a strategy. His military leaders, including General Ayomide, urged him to take a more aggressive approach, pushing into Araba's territory. But Obadalia, still haunted by the lessons of the previous war, chose a more cautious path. "We will defend our borders," he said, "but we will not invade unless forced to." The first battle was swift and brutal. Araba's forces struck unexpectedly, testing Zudora's defenses. The enemy came with overwhelming numbers, but Zudora's soldiers fought valiantly, holding their ground. Obadalia was in the heart of the battle, his eyes never leaving the fray, directing his troops with precision. The clash of swords and the cries of the wounded filled the air, but Obadalia remained focused. In the midst of the battle, a messenger arrived, bearing troubling news. King Adaba of Araba had sent a personal challenge to Obadalia. He demanded a duel between the two kings to settle the conflict. It was a bold move, one that would force Obadalia to confront his greatest adversary face to face. Though his generals urged him to avoid the duel, Obadalia knew that the challenge could be a chance to end the war before it escalated further. But Ayomide, ever the voice of reason, cautioned against it. "You cannot let pride dictate your decisions," she said. "The lives of so many are at stake. Think of our children, of the kingdom. Do not risk everything for a single battle." But Obadalia was torn. He understood her concerns, but the weight of his crown and the need to protect his people seemed to demand that he answer the call. The day of the duel arrived, and the two kings met on the field. The atmosphere was tense as Obadalia and King Adaba faced each other, surrounded by their armies. The tension between them was palpable, each man carried the burden of his kingdom's fate in his hands. The duel was fierce, with both kings showing their skill and strength. Obadalia's heart raced as he parried King Adaba's strikes, the weight of the moment pressing heavily on him. The battle was not just for honor, it was for the future of Zudora. But as the duel reached its peak, Obadalia had a moment of clarity. He realized that victory in this battle, this personal contest, would not bring peace. It would only further deepen the conflict. In a decisive move, Obadalia disarmed King Adaba, but instead of striking the final blow, he stepped back, lowering his sword. "This war will not be won through bloodshed," Obadalia declared, his voice strong. "You have lost this duel, but I will not kill you. Let this be a lesson. Our kingdoms do not need to be enemies." The crowd fell silent. Adaba, humiliated but alive, stepped back. The king of Araba seethed with anger, but he could not deny the truth in Obadalia's words. The duel, though a personal victory for Obadalia, had done little to stop the war from continuing. King Adaba's pride was shattered, and though he had lost the duel, he refused to concede. His forces continued to press into Zudora's borders, seeking to take control of the strategic lands. The battle for the western plains raged on, and the kingdom of Zudora was pushed to its limits. In the meantime, the political climate within Zudora was becoming more strained. With the war dragging on, factions within the kingdom began to push their own agendas. Some wanted Obadalia to push harder, to reclaim territory from Araba. They believed that diplomacy, not war, should be Zudora's path forward. Ayomide worked tirelessly to keep the kingdom united, trying to calm the unrest and focus the people on what truly mattered, peace. But as the war raged on, the political pressure on Obadalia grew heavier. He found himself torn between the needs of the kingdom, the pressures of the council, and his own moral compass. The war between Zudora and Araba had stretched on for months, and the toll was beginning to show. The economy was strained, and the people's patience was wearing thin. Within the royal court, whispers of discontent became louder, and Obadalia began to notice subtle changes in the attitudes of some of his closest allies. General Ayomide, once a loyal and steadfast leader, had begun to voice his displeasure more openly. "We should have taken the fight to Araba months ago. We cannot continue to waste our time with diplomacy while our borders are under siege." Obadalia listened carefully, but there was something in Ayomide's tone that unsettled him. He had always trusted the general, but the relentless pressure of the war seemed to be clouding his judgment. It wasn't until a trusted advisor came to him in secret that Obadalia learned the shocking truth: General Ayomide had been secretly negotiating with King Adaba. The general had been promised power and influence in a new, expanded Araba if they succeeded in defeating Zudora. Betrayed and heartbroken, Obadalia confronted Ayomide. "You would turn against your own people for power?" he demanded. Ayomide's eyes were cold, unrepentant. "Power is the only thing that matters, Obadalia. You, with your ideals and your compassion, will only lead us to ruin." The general was imprisoned, but the damage had already been done. The loyalty of the army was now in question, and the kingdom's unity was in jeopardy. With General Ayomide's betrayal hanging heavy over the kingdom, Obadalia turned his attention to restoring order and healing the rift within his forces. The discovery of the general's treachery had shaken Zudora to its core, but Obadalia knew that the kingdom could not afford further division. In the days that followed, Obadalia sought to reaffirm the loyalty of his soldiers, addressing them with passion and sincerity. He promised that, under his rule, they would have not only victory but peace, a peace that would not come at the cost of their integrity. Ayomide, too, played a crucial role in rebuilding the kingdom's fractured spirit. She worked tirelessly to heal the wounds within their court, reminding the nobles of their duty to the people, not to their personal ambitions. Together, they reminded Zudora that the strength of the kingdom lay not in its military, but in its unity and compassion. With the kingdom facing the consequences under the shadow of war once again, the kingdom of Zudora had united once more, and the stakes were higher than ever. Obadalia stood before his generals, now more determined than ever to secure a future for his people. The betrayal of General Ahade had left a deep scar, but it also illuminated the strength of the kingdom spirit. The people of Zudora were no longer just fighting for victory, they were fighting for their very survival. Ayomide, standing at his side, touched his arm gently. The battle ahead is not just for us, but for every child, every family, and every person who believes in Zudora. We must end this. Obadalia nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He had always believed that victory was about more than winning battles, it was about securing peace, a peace that would last long after the fighting ceased. But as the final clash with Araba loomed closer, he knew the price of that peace would be high. With the army mobilized and supplies ready, the day of the decisive battle arrived. The skies above the battlefield seemed to darken, as if nature itself sensed the gravity of the moment. The battlefield was a sea of soldiers, their armor glinting beneath the sun. On the opposing side, King Adaba stood tall, flanked by his loyal generals. He had learned from their previous encounters, and he knew that this battle would be different. It had to be different. The future of Araba rested on his success. Obadalia, with Ayomide at his side, rode to the front of his army. His face was set in determination, but his heart was heavy. He knew that this battle would be the culmination of everything they had fought for, lost, and sacrificed. As the battle unfolded, Obadalia moved with grace and skill, commanding his forces with precision. His strategies were as much about defense as they were about offense, ensuring that his troops held the line without overextending themselves. He could not afford to let the chaos of war cloud his judgment. But Adaba was ruthless, sending wave after wave of soldiers. Each strike felt like a blow to the very heart of Zudora, but Obadalia remained calm. He knew that the key to winning this battle was not in sheer strength, but in strategy. At the center of the battlefield, the two kings met once more. The moment Obadalia and Adaba locked eyes, the entire battlefield seemed to pause. Their rivalry was not just personal, it was a battle between two different visions for the future. Obadalia's ideals of unity and peace clashed against Adaba's thirst for power and conquest. "You should have let me rule," King Adaba sneered, his sword raised high. "This kingdom will fall without me." Obadalia's voice was calm, unwavering. "The people of Zudora will decide their fate, not you. You will never break them." The two kings clashed with ferocity, each blow resonating with years of tension. Obadalia fought with every ounce of his strength, his thoughts constantly on his kingdom and the future of his people. But King Adaba was a skilled warrior, and the duel between them seemed to stretch on endlessly. Suddenly, in the midst of their duel, a shout broke the air. A group of Araba's soldiers had breached the Zudoran defenses, threatening to overwhelm the forces that Obadalia had so carefully positioned. Obadalia hesitated for just a moment, but that moment was enough. Adaba took advantage of the opening, striking a blow that sent Obadalia to his knees. Ayomide's voice rang out across the battlefield. "Obadalia!" Obadalia, stunned by the blow, fought to remain conscious. His body ached, but his will remained strong. As he struggled to rise, he realized that this was not just his battle, it was the kingdom's battle. And in this moment, he had to decide whether his leadership would falter or strengthen. But before he could make his move, a surge of energy swept over him. His soldiers, seeing their king downed, rallied with renewed vigor. The spirit of Zudora surged in their veins, and they began to push back against the enemy. Ayomide, seeing the turn in the tide, charged forward with a fierce cry. With sword she cut her way through the enemy ranks, determined to reach her husband. "Obadalia, get up," she screamed, her voice a beacon through the chaos. With her rallying cry, Obadalia found strength. Slowly, painfully, he rose to his feet. He locked eyes with Ayomide, and in that moment, he knew that they could not lose. Not for their people, and not for each other. Obadalia and Ayomide fought side by side, their swords cutting through the battlefield in unison. Their strength and determination became the rallying point for their soldiers, who surged forward with renewed determination. As the battle raged on, the end was in sight. Adaba's forces, disorganized and broken, were retreating. King Adaba himself, seeing his defeat was imminent, made one final stand. He charged at Obadalia, his rage blinding him to everything else. Obadalia, bloodied but resolute, met Adaba's charge with a swift parry, knocking the king's sword aside. With a single, decisive strike, Obadalia disarmed Adaba and knocked him to the ground. "Your reign ends here," Obadalia said coldly, standing over his fallen enemy. Adaba, humiliated, seethed with anger, but his defeat was undeniable. "You may have won this battle, Obadalia," he spat, "but the war is far from over." Obadalia shook his head. "The war has already been decided. You have no place in the future of Zudora or Araba." With that, he turned his back on the fallen king, leaving him to be taken into custody. The battle was won, but Obadalia knew that this victory had come at a great cost. The battlefield was littered with the remnants of war, fallen soldiers, broken weapons, and the heavy scent of blood. The people of Zudora had won, but the cost was evident. Many had died, many had been injured, and the kingdom was left to rebuild. As Obadalia stood at the edge of the battlefield, looking over the ruins, Ayomide joined him. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her eyes filled with the same sorrow. "It's over," she whispered. "Is it?" Obadalia replied, his voice heavy with thought. "The battle may be over, but the peace is just beginning. We have so much to rebuild, our homes, our trust, and our future." In the weeks that followed, Zudora began its slow recovery. The people worked together to heal the land, rebuild cities, and mend broken hearts. Obadalia and Ayomide focused on strengthening their kingdom, ensuring that Zudora would never again be brought to the brink of destruction. The political climate had changed. Obadalia worked closely with his council to establish policies that would promote unity and cooperation among the kingdom's people. His leadership was no longer questioned, it was embraced. Yet, even as the kingdom healed, whispers of dissent still lingered. There were those who resented the changes, who believed that the old ways of power and conquest were the only way to secure their future. Obadalia and Ayomide, now more united than ever, focused on the next chapter for Zudora. Their vision was clear, to create a kingdom based on justice, fairness, and peace. They sought to forge alliances with other kingdoms, ensuring that the horrors of war would never return. But peace, as they both knew, was fragile. And while Zudora's future seemed brighter than ever, there were still shadows lurking, threats from within and without. The path ahead would not be easy. With the people of Zudora behind him, Obadalia faced the challenges of rebuilding, not just the kingdom's cities and borders, but its very spirit. His leadership had proven strong, but the test of time had yet to come. Ayomide stood by his side, their bond stronger than ever. Together, they worked toward the future, guiding Zudora toward an age of prosperity, peace, and unity. Years later, Obadalia and Ayomide's children played in the palace gardens, laughter echoing through the halls. Zudora, once on the brink of destruction, had risen from the ashes to become a beacon of hope and prosperity. The legacy of their struggle had shaped a new era, one of unity, strength, and peace. Obadalia stood at the palace window, looking out over the kingdom. He had given everything for Zudora's future. And as the sun set on the horizon, he knew that the story of Zudora was just beginning.